You know, it's like you can have this perfectly color-coded map of exactly why your brain is broken, right?
Right.
And you can hold that map, study it, and still be completely, totally unable to fix the actual problem.
Oh, absolutely. It's so frustrating.
It really is. So, welcome to today's deep dive, everyone. Today, we are looking at some texts that explain why some of the most emotionally intelligent, highly self-aware people actually suffer the longest.
Yeah, it's a huge paradox.
Right, because it's an incredibly common scenario. You're doing the work, you've read all the best-selling psychology books, you've faithfully done like every cognitive behavioral worksheet out there.
You've named all your parts.
Exactly. You've learned how to spot your specific triggers, and you could practically teach a masterclass on naming your different emotional states.
You know exactly why you react the way you do.
Yes. But then you still wake up at 3 in the morning with the exact same anxious thought just looping endlessly in your head.
Still snapping at your partner over, something incredibly minor.
Or you cancel that date at the last minute, or you completely avoid opening that one dreaded email for like a week.
Yeah. You possess all the data, you have all the vocabulary, but the actual lived experience, like that heavy, uncomfortable physical sensation in your chest or the knot in your stomach, it just hasn't budged an inch.
Not 1 inch.
So today we are exploring a really fascinating concept, pulling from some brilliant excerpts from a text called Beyond Insight, The Path to Somatic and Relational Healing.
And we also have some really practical practice details from Coping and Healing Counseling, which is a telehealth provider based in Georgia.
Right. So the core question we are answering for you today is simply this. Why doesn't knowing your problems actually fix them?
Okay, let's unpack this, because if you are listening to this right now and just nodding along, thinking about that one habit you just can't seem to break despite understanding its origin perfectly, I need to reassure you right out of the gate.
It's not your fault.
It is not a failure of your intelligence. According to the source material, it's not a lack of willpower or discipline or anything like that. It is literally just how human nervous systems biologically operate.
Right. The central thesis of the text we're looking at is it's beautifully concise, but it completely upends how most of us approach self-improvement.
It really does.
It states, and I quote, "Insight tells you what's happening. Healing changes what's happening. Those aren't the same job."
Wow, those aren't the same job.
Exactly. Because we are so socially conditioned to believe that if we just acquire enough information, right, if we just figure out the exact root cause of our pain, the pain will just poof, evaporate upon discovery.
Right, like we treat our minds like a mystery novel, where just finding the killer automatically brings the victim back to life.
That is a great way to put it.
But the text points out something really startling about what we might call the insight trap.
The insight trap.
Because insightful people have this tendency to treat their emotional struggles or even their trauma like an intellectual puzzle to solve.
Oh, completely. They just keep refining and refining their intellectual understanding.
And they collect more data. They find better, more nuanced words to describe their pain. They build this flawless chronological timeline of exactly why they are the way they are.
But while they're doing all of that really high-level cognitive processing, the physical body underneath is just keeps executing the exact same stress responses it learned years ago.
Because intellectualizing often masquerades as healing.
Yes, it feels productive.
It does. You feel like you are doing something by researching your trauma.
Right, but the logic centers of your brain, like the prefrontal cortex that reads the books and fills out all those worksheets, they are fundamentally disconnected from the limbic system.
The emotional center.
Exactly. And they're disconnected from the body's deeply ingrained emotional reflexes. The body learned a protective response, maybe years or even decades ago.
And understanding that history is necessary, right? Like the text explicitly notes that understanding is a prerequisite.
Absolutely a prerequisite. But it is entirely insufficient on its own.
So is this basically like having a perfect color-coded architectural blueprint of a broken house, but never actually picking up a hammer?
Oh, I love that analogy.
Like, you know exactly why the roof leaks. You have the whole historical timeline of the leak. You know the precise angle of the flawed beam, but you are still just sitting there getting rained on in your living room.
What's fascinating here is how perfectly that analogy captures the biological reality. You literally cannot think your way out of a feeling.
Because your brain just doesn't work that way.
Right. Because the alarm system of your brain, the amygdala, is so much faster than your logic center.
Like fractions of a second faster.
Exactly. If your body learned long ago that conflict is dangerous, Reading a book about healthy communication does not stop your heart from racing.
Right. Yeah.
Doesn't stop your throat from closing up when someone says, we need to talk.
Oh, man. The dreaded "we need to talk" text. Your stomach just drops immediately.
Exactly. And that's because your nervous system is already flooding your body with cortisol and adrenaline before your logic brain even fully realizes what sentence was spoken.
It's just a reflex.
The body is running an old, hardwired survival script. Insight is just reading that script out loud. It does nothing to actually rewrite the ending.
Man, that is so clarifying. Okay, so let's transition from the problem of pure cognition to how we actually fix the roof.
Let's pick up the hammer.
Right. Because if thinking and insight aren't enough to stop the 3 a.m. anxiety loops or the reactive snapping, what actually alters the biological script?
Well, the sources outline 4 very specific mechanisms of psychotherapeutic change that actually bypass that logic trap.
Okay, lay them on me.
So we have to look at what the research consistently points to regarding how lasting change occurs in the nervous system. The first critical mechanism outlined in the text is the therapeutic alliance and a corrective relational experience.
Okay, a corrective relational experience.
Right, because a wound created in a relationship cannot be healed in a vacuum.
Meaning you can't just meditate your way out of relational trauma alone in your bedroom.
Precisely. The opposite of isolation is required.
Right.
If your original wounding happened in the context of a relationship, say an unpredictable parent or a toxic partner, maybe a hostile peer group,
Yeah.
your nervous system learned a fundamental rigid rule.
Which is what? Human connection equals danger.
Exactly.
Mm-hmm.
And you cannot convince your nervous system otherwise just by thinking about it
Right.
or, reading a clinical study on human bonding.
The body needs proof.
The body requires physical, lived proof to update its rules. You have to actually experience a relationship that is safe, consistent, and supportive over a period of time.
And I guess the therapeutic alliance provides like a laboratory for that.
Exactly. It proves to the nervous system in real time through co-regulation and consistent presence that vulnerability does not always end in an attack.
So you are providing the body with new, undeniable evidence, not just new thoughts.
Right.
But wait, here's where it gets really interesting. And, well, I actually have to push back on this a little bit.
Okay, let's hear it.
Because the second mechanism the text mentions is bottom-up regulation through somatic, embodied, and experiential interventions.
Yes. Bottom-up regulation.
Right. But if I am in a genuinely toxic situation, let's say I am dealing with just a terrible, highly manipulative boss, shouldn't my logic brain stay in absolute control so I can navigate the office politics?
I see where you're going with this.
Like, if I just use somatic breathing to calm myself down, aren't I just becoming passively accepting of a bad situation? Am I just, like, sedating myself so I can endure the toxicity?
That is such a common fear, and it is a crucial distinction to make. Somatic regulation is never, ever about ignoring danger or sedating yourself into compliance.
Okay.
Let's contrast it. Top-down regulation is using your thoughts to try and suppress your physical reaction. It's telling yourself, I am fine, I shouldn't be angry, I just need to get through this meeting.
Right, just white-knuckling it.
Exactly. And your body usually ignores that completely and just stays incredibly tense.
Yeah, your shoulders are practically up to your ears.
Right. But bottom-up regulation starts with the physical body. It uses somatic tools to actually interrupt the brain's threat detection loop.
So it's working in reverse.
Yes. When you consciously slow your breathing, or physically ground your feet into the floor, or intentionally release the tension in your jaw, you are essentially hijacking the vagus nerve.
So you are forcing the body to send an all-clear signal up the spinal cord to the brain, rather than waiting around for the brain to tell the body to calm down.
Exactly. You are intervening at the level where the feeling actually lives. And here's the key to your question about the toxic boss. By regulating the nervous system first, you are not accepting the toxic boss. You are actually bringing your prefrontal cortex, your logic and strategy center back fully online.
Oh, because when you're panicked, you can't think straight anyway.
Literally. When your nervous system is in a fight or flight panic state, your brain shuts down access to complex problem solving. Somatic regulation brings you back to a grounded state so you can actually set a firm boundary or, plan your exit strategy with a clear head.
You aren't just reacting from a place of panicked, messy survival reflexes.
Right. You are dealing with a threat from a position of biological strength.
Okay, that makes total sense. So let's say I manage to use a somatic tool. I ground my feet during a stressful interaction, I hijack the vagus nerve, and I keep my prefrontal cortex online.
Great.
But one deep breath does not erase 20 years of a trauma reflex, right? Like, does my body just snap back to its default anxiety setting tomorrow?
It absolutely will,
Well, that's depressing.
which is why you must engage the third mechanism, repeated practice in safe witness conditions.
Oh,
The body learned its original protective responses through repetition over years,
oh.
right? And it has to learn the new grounded responses through repetition as well. We are talking about building entirely new neural pathways.
So you really have to put in the reps, like going to the emotional gym.
Exactly. But the text specifically emphasizes the witnessed part of those reps.
Right, witnessed conditions. Why does that matter?
Having another human being present, usually a trained therapist holding a safe space, while you practice feeling a really difficult emotion without being overwhelmed by it, well, that ties back directly to that corrective relational experience we talked about earlier.
Because you aren't doing it alone anymore.
Right. When you process deep anger or profound grief, while someone simply sits there with you, validating the emotion without judging it and without trying to rush in and fix it, your nervous system begins to realize it can actually survive these massive emotional waves.
Wow. And this leads us directly into the fourth mechanism, which honestly sounds a bit like a concept from a science fiction movie.
It really does.
The text calls it updating implicit emotional learnings, which is also clinically known as memory reconsolidation. And the text basically frames this as the holy grail of psychological change.
It sounds totally futuristic, but the biology of it is heavily documented. Implicit emotional learnings are those automatic unconscious reactions we've been discussing,
Like the instant knot in the stomach.
or the sudden urge to flee the room. Memory reconsolidation is the actual biological process where the brain updates a deeply held emotional belief with new information.
Let's break down the underlying mechanism here for everyone listening, because this part is just wild to me. You can't just think a new thought to reconsolidate a memory. The text explains you have to experience a biological mismatch.
Right, a mismatch. Think of a traumatic or deeply ingrained memory as a piece of cold, hard glass.
Okay.
In its normal state, it is rigid, solid, and completely impossible to reshape without shattering it. When a trigger happens, the brain expects the old, terrifying outcome based on that rigid memory.
It expects the worst.
But suppose you're in a therapeutic setting, or you're practicing a new behavior, and you experience a mismatch.
What does that look like?
Well, you expect to be yelled at for making a mistake, but instead, you are met with calm understanding. Or you expect total abandonment, but you receive steady presence.
So that mismatch between your expectation and reality, that temporarily heats the glass up.
Yes. The brain recognizes a major discrepancy between what the old memory predicted and what the current environment is actually providing. And when this mismatch happens while you are deeply physically and emotionally engaged, the neural synapses holding that memory temporarily unlock.
The glass becomes molten.
The glass becomes molten and malleable. In that brief window, the new SACE experience literally reshapes the emotional weight of the original memory.
That is incredible.
And when the memory cools and stores itself back in your brain, it has been physically altered. The trigger just no longer produces the same visceral panic. That is what true healing looks like at a cellular level.
It's like rewriting the core operating system, not just organizing the files on the desktop.
Exactly.
So, having established that true change requires this incredible, intricate web of relational safety, somatic regulation, and memory reconsolidation, we kind of hit a massive practical wall here.
We do.
Right. How do you actually access this highly specific multimodal care in the real world? Because for a lot of people, just finding a professional who understands that intellectual insight isn't enough feels completely overwhelming.
It really does. And the source text offers a very validating perspective on this exact moment of frustration.
Yeah.
When a patient sits down and says, I understand exactly what my problem is, I know why I do it, I just cannot change my behavior.
Yeah.
That is frequently misinterpreted by the patient as a sign of being fundamentally unfixable.
Right. So many people reach that exact point and think, well, I guess I'm just broken. The blueprint is flawless, but I don't know how to swing a hammer, so I will just live with the leak forever.
But the literature makes it abundantly clear. Feeling stuck in that specific gap between knowing and changing is the absolute perfect indication for a clinical referral.
It's a sign to start, not a sign to quit.
Exactly. It is the exact moment to bring in someone who specializes in bridging that gap through those very mechanisms we just discussed.
And the text provides a fascinating academic case study on how this multimodal care is actually delivered and structured in practice. It looks at a specific telehealth provider in Georgia called Coping and Healing Counseling, or CHC.
Yes, CHC.
And what's compelling from a systemic perspective is how their operational model actually reflects the science of nervous system regulation. They aren't just assigning you more cognitive worksheets.
Right, we have enough worksheets.
They are employing clinicians who specifically work across cognitive, somatic, and relational modalities.
When we examine the structure of a group like CHC, it really reveals the necessary components of accessible modern care. They maintain a team of over 15 licensed therapists, which encompasses licensed clinical social workers, licensed professional counselors, and licensed marriage and family therapists.
So they have the clinical rigor.
But the critical element highlighted in the source is their emphasis on being a diverse, culturally competent team.
Which is huge, because if we look back at that very first mechanism, the therapeutic alliance and feeling safe, you need to feel seen and understood in your specific cultural context to even begin to let your guard down.
Safety is the absolute non-negotiable prerequisite for somatic work in memory reconsolidation.
Right.
If a patient is constantly having to explain or translate or defend their cultural reality or systemic stressors to their therapist, their nervous system remains highly guarded.
Because they don't feel entirely safe.
Exactly. The analytical brain stays fully engaged in defense mode. A culturally competent environment removes that friction. It signals directly to the amygdala that it is safe to begin the bottom-up regulation.
And they handle a really wide spectrum of care, too, from teens 13 and up to individuals, couples, and families, addressing the exact areas where that insight trap usually paralyzes people.
Like severe anxiety, depression, complex trauma.
Grief, chronic stress, all of it.
If we connect this to the bigger picture of modern healthcare, the delivery method itself is actually a tool for nervous system regulation. Well, CHC operates as a 100% HIPAA-compliant telehealth practice, covering all 159 counties in Georgia.
Oh, I see. Let's think about what that means for the safe witnessed conditions required for memory reconsolidation. You are doing incredibly vulnerable, body-based trauma work from the physical safety of your own living room.
Yeah.
For a patient whose nervous system is already redlining, removing the stress of fighting traffic, sitting in a clinical waiting room under weird fluorescent lights, and navigating an office setting that actually accelerates the therapeutic process.
Tremendously. You are starting the session from a much more regulated baseline.
That makes total sense. And the removal of friction extends to the financial structuring, too, which is often the most significant barrier to that long-term, repeated practice we talked about.
Oh, without a doubt. Healing requires consistency.
Yeah.
If a patient is paying exorbitant out-of-pocket fees every single week, the financial stress alone acts as a persistent trigger. It keeps the body bathed in cortisol and entirely defeats the purpose of the somatic work.
Right. You can't relax if you're worried about making rent because of therapy. So the source outlines their accessibility model, which is frankly just a great example of democratizing this level of care.
It's vital.
For Georgia Medicaid patients, the financial barrier is completely removed with a $0 copay.
Wow.
You know. And for those with major commercial insurance, they accept Aetna, Cigna, Blue Cross Blue Shield, United Healthcare, and Humana. The financial burden is heavily reduced to typical copays of just $20 to $40 a session.
That structure allows the patient to stay in the process long enough to actually achieve those biological mismatches we discussed.
Right, to actually rewrite the hard drive.
Rather than rushing through some cognitive behavioral tricks just because they can only afford 3 sessions.
Exactly. And the text notes that patients in Georgia can initiate this process super easily, simply by visiting their portal at cheechtherapy.com or emailing support@cheechtherapy.com or utilizing a direct line at 404-832-01102.
It serves as a strong, real-world example of how administrative, geographic, and financial barriers are actively being dismantled.
So people can actually do the heavy lifting of somatic healing.
It transitions the theoretical science of memory reconsolidation into an accessible reality for the general public.
It really does. So what does this all mean? Let's bring this vast amount of psychological and biological data together for you. Insight is merely the map, but the somatic and relational work is the actual journey.
Well said.
You cannot outthink a human nervous system. Your brilliant, highly analytical mind has done a phenomenal job of keeping you safe and figuring out the complex puzzle of your past.
It built a great blueprint.
It did. But it cannot solve the problem of your bodily reactions on its own. However, with the right therapeutic alliance, with bottom-up regulation that honors your biology, and with repeated practice in a genuinely safe space, you can rewrite the script. you can actually patch the roof.
The science is very clear that change is biologically possible at any stage of life. But I want to leave you with a final, slightly provocative thought to turn over in your mind today.
Okay, let's hear it.
We've established that insight alone can sometimes act as a sophisticated trap, one that prolongs our suffering by tricking our brains into feeling like we are being highly productive.
Right.
So if you are using hyper-awareness and intellectualization to avoid doing the actual vulnerable healing in your emotional life, where else are you doing this?
Ooh.
Perhaps in your career trajectory, your physical health, or your creative goals, where are you using endless overanalysis, planning, and research as a clever, respectable shield to avoid the messy, embodied work of actual terrifying change?
Are you just staring at the blueprint, or are you finally ready to pick up the hammer? Think about it.